difficult mitzvahs for most Jews to live by is the mitzvah of loving your fellow Jew as yourself. It's something that the Yisroel instituted. We say every morning in davening. It's a commandment that we've all been told since we're children. Even someone like myself who did not grow up religious understood the idea that the Jewish people are like a family, and that even many a non-Jew has the phrase from their own scriptures, treat others as you wish to be treated, which we're going to learn is really, so to speak, hijacked, culturally appropriated from the Jewish people, but we'll talk about that. But the idea of loving another person, such as myself, is not only difficult practically, but also difficult to understand. And so now we will explore the Chabad interpretation of this commandment and the spiritual ramifications and practical ramifications in our lives of how we can better practice this commandment in our life. Yisur sinas Yisroel, Mitzvosecha Yisroel, that there's a prohibition against the hating of a fellow Jew and the commandment to love a fellow Jew. This is a discourse delivered by the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Lubavitcher Rebbe, in a sefer called Derech Mitzvosecha, which does exactly this with most of the 613 mitzvot, provides the spiritual, Kabbalistic, and Hasidic approach to understanding the mitzvahs. Okay, 238th mitzvah in the enumeration of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah in Sefer HaChinuch is to harbor no enmity, no hatred towards one's fellow, as it is written, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. The 243rd mitzvah is to love every Jew, as it is written, love your fellow man as yourself. The adage of Hillel the elder to the would-be proselyte, the would-be convert, what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow man. This is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. It is well known, but is not quite clear. Though we can understand that this mitzvah is the essence of the precepts between man and his fellow, how can it be said with respect to those between man and God, especially in light of the verse, if you act righteously, what do you give him? So the question is, how are we going to connect the idea of loving my fellow man to how I serve God? And especially in light of a verse that's brought from Job, that suggests that there's nothing man can really do to affect the Creator, right? The Creator of the universe is infinite, but he's unchangeable, so to speak, you would think, or you would understand, right? God creates a world, but God himself is not created. He's not changeable. There's no change that affects him, even though he created a world outside of him, so to speak, or outside of him. Nothing is outside of him, we understand. But that God himself can't be, so to speak, impacted by the deeds of man. Okay? So how are we going to say then that the way that I treat my fellow man is affecting God? It's also written that it is proper to say before the morning davening, so this is what we said before, that I hereby take upon myself the mitzvah, to fulfill the positive mitzvah, love your fellow man as yourself. It's brought down by the Yisroel in his nusach that we daven by. For it is an all-important principle in the service of God. The following exposition will enable us to understand the meaning of this mitzvah. Okay. The primary student of the Yisroel, Rabbi Chaim Vital, writes in the name of his mentor in Sefer Tamei HaMitzvos, section Kedoshim, all Israel comprises one complete entry within the soul of Adam, within the soul of man. As we have stated elsewhere in Sefer HaGilgulim, each individual Jew constitutes one particular part of Adam's soul. So the idea is that Adam Arishon, the first man, was what's called a Neshamas Klal, a general soul, and that the souls of man that would come after him, both his children, grandchildren, etc., would be, you might call, sub-souls within the general Klal soul that is Adam. And that every single Jewish person that would ever be born is also, so to speak, a sub-soul of the original man, of Adam. This is the basis of the responsibility of one Jew for another if he sins. In other words, being that we are all a part of the same general soul, so it can't be said that I'm separate from my fellow Jew, heaven forbid, because we're all just some sub-part of a greater whole. Accordingly, it was the custom of the Yisroel to recite the specific transgressions enumerated in the vidui and confession that we say during prayers, during davening, even though he himself did not, God forbid, sin, for all Israel is one entity. In other words, if a perfect tzaddik is going to come after during mincha and is going to start pounding his chest for all of his sins, heaven forbid. So this is hypocritical, or it's heaven forbid, we're going to say he's lying. He doesn't commit these sins. So the idea is that he's confessing on behalf of all of Israel, and he's he is qualified, so to speak, to do this because he is a general soul, and we all make up and comprise one general soul that is represented in righteous people. Meaning, the soul of Adam was the general all-encompassing soul of all the souls of Israel, except for those that will descend after the time of Mashiach. He comprised within his soul, all souls, some originating in his head, others in his arms, etc. And for this reason, he was called Adam. And this reason, he was called man, which is etymologically related to Edame le'elyon, the higher man, the one above. For Adam was an all-encompassing, and he was derived from Adam de Ela, from the supernal man, the man in heaven, so to speak, the physical representation, as it were, of God in heaven, the perfect spiritual composition of godly attributes as they're created in this world. It's called man. So it's written, my firstborn son Israel, just as son resembles his father, Israel Adam resembles Adam de La'ela. So in the same way that the Jewish people are called a firstborn son to God, in the way that we resemble our Creator, right? Like a firstborn son has the attributes of the father, to the degree where it could be like genuinely recognized, is the idea metaphorically. So in this way, Adam, the first man, is resembling Hashem himself. Elsewhere, it is explained that Adam de La'ela represents the higher primordial man. It represents and corresponds to the divine name of Ma of Tikkun. This causes the mutual inclusiveness of each of the 10 spheres, Chesed containing Gevurah, Gevurah containing Chesed, etc. Okay, so we just said that when Hashem comes to create the world, originally, God creates the world through the spiritual energy known as Tohu. Tohu meaning chaos. Tohu meaning strong, unique spiritual identity. So Chesed, the attribute of Chesed, the godly attribute of Chesed, is completely, so to speak, encompassed with itself and unable to express itself outside of its clearly defined bounds. And Chokhmah and wisdom and Bina and Das and understanding and knowledge, the same thing. Unable to connect with its other godly attributes and only able to purely express itself. And the ability for these individual godly attributes to intertwine and connect with one another and not be so, we would say, selfish, but to rather be self-effacing, to be able to be a part of a greater whole. So this is called Ma of Tikkun. This is called the attribute of what, of the concept of what in the world of Tikkun, in the world where these energies are able to come together. So this is all very Kabbalistic language, and we're going to come to understand this a little better as the Mimer continues. So I don't want to go too heavy on that right now. But in general, the idea being that in this world where Hashem, where nature comes into fruition, into reality, the proper way of interacting in this world is in recognizing when I'm a student and when I'm a teacher, when I'm here to receive and when I'm here to give, is to be able to be malleable, is to not be so selfish is another way to put it. So in Tohu, in that spiritual, so to speak, consciousness, only the positive aspects are emphasized, and they're unable to interact with one another because they're so self-aggrandizing. As opposed to in Tikkun, in the world of correction, where, okay, kindness is wonderful, and severity is wonderful, and victory is wonderful, but these attributes, and intellect is wonderful, but these attributes are able to, so to speak, step back metaphorically, and work with one another, and recognize the value of each other attribute. In Tohu, however, in the world of Tohu, in the world of chaos, The spheres, the 10 attributes, are in a state of separation and disunity. So the integration of the spheres in Tikkun is effected through the divine name Ma of Mitzvah, permeating the spheres. Their forehead. But in general, the forehead, the forefront, is where the general will, the encompassing will, is recognized. So that means that in a place where something greater than myself is recognized and at the forefront, I can take now a step back and not be so self-important. And this is called Ma of Mitzvah, and this is what Tikkun is. This is what correction is. This is the world of correction. That's how that in other words, that's how Tohu becomes Tikkun. Is something greater coming to collapse the ego, the Ashus, a greater desire. This is the Ein Sof, the infinite light, who comprises all the worlds and realms, as well as the individual beings, as it is written, all things come from you. Hence, it brings about their coalescence even after they each have emerged into their particular revealed aspects. In other words, the thing that brings from Tohu the 10 spheres, the 10 divine attributes, individually expressing themselves, the things that brings them together is Ein Sof, is infinite light, which itself is comprised, infinite light is the expression of where there is no distinguishing. Where Tohu and Tikkun and what we would say Or and Kalim, that light and vessels, where these are all expressions, so to speak, relative to God himself, and that they should all be egoless, so to speak. They should all be not so self-important. And it's from this space that the attributes are able to coalesce. And this is what's the meaning of the name of, we're in Tikkun Zohar, the name of Ma is the path of Atzilus. That the idea that just as a path joins two separate places, that the path of Ma, the name, Hashem's name Ma, binds the spheres one with the other. That what we explained before about not being egotistical, so to speak, and being able to recognize the greater picture is what allows for each attribute of godliness to bind with one another. Similarly, it can be understood how the souls of Israel collectively comprise one complete entity, namely the soul of Adam, which is the general all-embracing soul. Although it contains 248 distinct spiritual parts, referencing the 248 positive commandments in Torah, these parts are mutually inclusive, each containing the others. In other words, even though there are 248 individual parts of the body, each part individual of one another is useless. So I'm going to have a few veins and I'm going to feel good about myself. Without all my veins working in continuity, in conjunction, better word, so what's the value of having one vein? It's not so great. By way of analogy, a human body consists of various parts: head, feet, hands, nails, etc. Yet each part incorporates all the others. In the hand, there flows through the interconnecting veins something of the foot's vitality. The same is true of all the other bodily parts. Therefore, as is known, it is possible to cure one part of the body by an injection into the other part, because of the confluence of blood in the circulatory system. So, blood is the example that Rebbe gives here. Also, pain, really, just in any form, right? If a person has a immense pain in, let's say, their elbow, heaven forbid, they hit their funny bone, and then 5 seconds later, they step on a rock. Not only is the pain of the funny bone initially, so to speak, kind of felt in the entire body, where the entire body feels like different and almost more sensitive, but now the pain that it hits the foot is going to take away from the pain that I just felt in the elbow, which one could say suggests perhaps a qualitative ability for the brain to only handle so much pain, but I don't think that's the case, especially with maybe a funny bone and stepping on a rock. What's going to happen is, or maybe focus, the distraction, but we're going to see that actually the elbow and the foot in their own way are actually interconnected. And the circulatory system of blood is also another example. This integration of the bodily organs and of the vital forces within them is due to the general life force that comprises them all. This general life force dwells in the brain, where it is diffused and individualized, but contains them all, as, for example, the unformed hyalic matter, hyal. This integration of the bodily organs and of the vital forces within them is due to the general life force that comprises them all, This general life force dwells in the brain, whence it is diffused and individualized, but contains them all. So that life force being the soul, and even though the soul primarily rests in the brain, and it, so to speak, equally distributes itself throughout the body, and in this way, each part of the body is equidistant from the soul. It's not like the foot, like the head is closest to the soul, because that's where it primarily expresses itself, but you can't really say the foot is closer to the soul than the hand. I mean, physically it's closer to the head, but in their own way, they're both equidistant from the soul. The soul is an all-encompassing thing, and it covers the entire body, and it connects the entire body. For this reason, the brain perceives the pain of all the 248 organs, and to the brain, the pain of the arm and the leg are similar. Indeed, at times the brain senses more acutely the pain of a wound to the nail than the pain of a wound to the hand, as can be observed. In other words, like we said before, it's not necessarily proximity to the brain. If I can, heaven forbid, be punched in the chest, or I could step in a rock, and it could be the stepping on the rock that my brain actually feels more. So we understand the soul primarily rests in the brain, but it equally distributes through the rest of the body. Similarly, the coalescence of the 248 parts of Adam's soul, one with the other, is due to the source of his soul's vitality deriving from the supernal wisdom of the supernal being, the blessed Ein Sof. God abides in and is united with his wisdom, for he and his wisdom are all one. Therefore it is written, my firstborn son, just as a son is derived from a drop deriving from his father's brain, so too his soul is derived from his wisdom. However, after Adam's soul was divided into numerous root souls, which in turn were subdivided into manifold branches and sparks and individual bodies, the soul's state is analogous to the bodily organs which have become severed from one another. In this case, the pain of the foot is no longer felt by the hand. So we said, firstly, how do we know that Adam, so to speak, what do we mean by Adam representing the, so to speak, Adam Elyon, that the higher primordial man? That Adam is the first man, that his soul, the root of his soul's vitality, was the general supreme wisdom of the supernal being, the actual, which is, again, another way of saying that the heavens themselves come into existence through Ein Sof, through the infinite light, and Adam himself, his soul, comes into existence directly from the infinite light, and all other people are derivatives. In the same way the world itself is the chain-like deviation from the original light into its separate forms. So all the different souls of man are likened to a somewhat deviation, so to speak, on the original general soul, which was Adam. So the separation between one Jew and another exists only in respect to the body. In other words, my perceived separation between myself and another actual Jewish person is literally just that it's perceived, because I have a physical body. But at the level of soul, so we're really two different expressions of the exact same root soul. As parts of a comprehensive whole, or actually even deeper than that, almost like two cells of the same organ or same organism that are functioning, and although not recognizing each other's utility, are perfectly in line with the greater general function and thereby a part of the exact same unit, even though one serves and appears to be like a fingernail, and one like a heart, and one like a this, and one like a that. As parts of a comprehensive whole, their souls are never truly separated, analogous to a hand that has veins linking it to the legs and eyes, and the foot to the hand. Accordingly, the hand, for example, feels an intense pain, in a spiritual sense, from the pain of the eye as mentioned above. Hence, the Yisroel would recite confession, vidui, for all the transgressions that any Jew may have committed. For the part in the general soul in which that Jew's soul was rooted was suffering, and this pain was transmitted to the higher parts where the soul of the Yisroel was rooted. In other words, just like Adam is a higher, more encompassing general soul, so was the Yisroel. And so when a regular Jew would sin, heaven forbid, the Yisroel as an encompassing soul would experience that. And thereby, by saying confession, it's not just a metaphor. Oh, this person, when any Jew sins, it's like he sins too. The actual impact that that sin has on the soul of that Yid impacts the Yisroel. So when he makes the confession, he's actually making a physical correction or a spiritual correction that affected him as well and the entire Jewish world. How much more so is this true with respect to the source of our souls, i.e. the brain of the Father and his blessed wisdom, which comprises all the 248 parts and perceives their discomfort. So even more so we're saying with the original man. So if the Yisroel had this impact, so even more so with Adam. We are therefore commanded to love every individual Jew, since each one includes all the souls of Israel, as in the above analogy of the bodily organs. Thus, a person incorporates also his fellow, so he should love his fellow as he does himself. Similarly, he is incorporated within his fellow, as mentioned above with reference to the interconnection of the bodily organs. In other words, by recognizing my fellow Jew's place in the general collective Jew, I recognize my own place, and both of us now become interconnected in a greater whole. For this reason, also one must accept upon himself this mitzvah before beginning to pray. One is thereby able to offer one's soul to God in the recital of the word echad, in the word Shema, so that it rise before him in the manner of Mayim Nukvin in Kriyas Shema. If I plan to stand before God and pronounce that all of Israel is one, while I am separating myself and another Jew from the community of Israel, I become like a blemished offer before Hashem. I am inconsistent. I am not corrected. So when I stand before God and I say Shema Yisroel Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and I have a separation, so to speak, in my own soul and my own heart. So but if I can correct that in myself, let's hear that Rebbe says. This elevation can only be achieved when the soul is complete and healthy, namely when it unites with all the other souls, just as bodily organ is healthy when its veins that link it to all the organs are healthy. Then his soul can ascend in favor before God in his blessed wisdom, which contains all the souls actually as one. In other words, you're not actually as one in your own consciousness, so to speak, if you separate yourself, heaven forbid, from another Jew, and then you're declaring before God that we're all one. But if I can actualize it in my life, in as much as his soul is also unified with all others, it can ascend into this general, all-encompassing light that is its true source and root. So when I say the Shema and my soul is, so to speak, being elevated in heaven and being encompassed in this all-encompassing light, my soul's experience in that will be much greater if it's actually connected with all my fellow Jews. This unity is achieved when a man demonstrates his unreserved love for his fellow, as the interconnection of the bodily organs, one with the other, with the feeling of what is mine is yours, for he is his bone and flesh. If, however, he feels enmity in his heart for a fellow Jew, he sunders from his soul that part of his fellow contained within him, rejecting him by his hatred and removing his will from him. He thereby blemishes and mars his own soul, for now this part is lacking in him. He thus becomes defective, since every individual part is comprised of all the 613, and through his hatred, he severs from himself that individual part. In other words, you can't say, I'm going to do 612 of the mitzvahs, I'm going to worry about this 613th later, because each mitzvah is contained within the other. So by denying one, I denied them all. He is then unable to ascend in favor before God, as it is written, he who has a blemish shall not approach to offer. For the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, blessed be he who is not comprised of them all, who does comprise them all, will not tolerate him because of the flaw within him being deficient of that individual, for the Or Ein Sof comprises that missing individual as well. This should suffice for the intelligent. That is why we have been commanded with several prohibitions against the offering of a blemished Kohanim and against the defective sacrifices themselves, as they are described in the Parshas Emor. We have likewise been enjoined with a positive precept to offer every sacrifice unblemished, as it is written, to be accepted, it shall be perfect, it shall have no blemish. In other words, we can now understand the mitzvah Kohen Balmum, of why a Kohen is not allowed, a Kohen, of someone of the priestly class in the temple, we would have all sorts of amazing ceremonies. I'm not a Kohen. The Kohanim would have all sorts of incredible ceremonies going on all day, and especially Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, etc. And the Kohanim themselves physically had to have certain expectations. And if you had a blemish, you weren't allowed to participate in the ceremony, but you'd still allowed to eat the food. It was a whole thing. And so now we can understand the reason why. Because the physical blemish on a Kohen would have been a physical representation of a lacking, again, not necessarily literally, although ideally in a perfect world, and perhaps in the time of the first and second temple, literally, a lacking in that Kohen, where his blemish represents his lack of love for a fellow Jew, his disconnect from one aspect of his own soul because of his inability to love this fellow Jew, and thereby is unable to participate in the service of the Beis Mikdash. We have thus then clearly elucidated the reason for this mitzvah of Ahavat Yisroel. Yet, based upon an exposition of the above-mentioned statement of Hillel, there is another wonderful explanation. It too elucidates the profound goodness that one accomplishes for himself and for the entire world through observing this positive mitzvah. It also explains the opposite, God forbid, when one neglects it and transgresses the negative injunction of the Torah, you shall not hate. Let us understand why Hillel paraphrased this mitzvah in the negative. What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow, and did not state it in the positive, as did Onkelos in his rendition, love your fellow as yourself. Onkelos famously translated the entire Chumash into Aramaic so that the Jewish people at the time would be able to understand it, and in his translations contain many of the secrets and the wisdom of Torah. So when Hillel says, "Do not, what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow," and Onkelos says, "Love your fellow as yourself," so Onkelos translates it as the opposite. How are we to understand this? And the answer is that Hillel, in his understanding, actually understood it even deeper. Says the Gemara, a person sees no flaw within himself does not mean that the person is completely unaware of his shortcomings. On the contrary, he may be aware of and comprehend the depths of his deficiency even more than the other person. For someone else perceives only what is visible to the eye, while he discerns what is in the depths of his own heart. The meaning then is that his fault is of no importance to him, and therefore does not disturb him. It is as if he does not see it as all, for his great self-love covers all his shortcomings. In other words, in the same way that if a person was to come to Rabbi Moshe, your mile is embarrassing. Okay, 15-minute mile, you're a grown man. Okay, you should be at a 10.5, easy. So I don't know this. I don't have a great mile, that I should be exercising a little more in the morning. All right. I have a lot going on. I'm a rabbi. How much do I really need to exercise? How hard is that to come up with? It's not so crazy. I'll be okay. In the same way, a person from the same place where they're so obviously able to forgive themselves, because it's not that they don't recognize, of course I could run, I could work harder. It's that it doesn't have a real significance, a real chashivas, because it's in the bigger picture. What is it? I'm not going to let it take away from the bigger picture of who I see myself as. In the same way, I'm not going to apply, or rather I am going to apply that love to my fellow Jew and his shortcomings. Not that I don't recognize that they're there. I'm not lying to myself. I see that it's there. It's not that serious. Okay, he's got problems, I got problems, he's working on himself. Though intellectually aware of his deficiencies, he relegates them to a superficial, peripheral status, not allowing them to evoke a corresponding emotional feeling of distress. Accordingly, his shortcomings give him no cause to be concerned. Any fault becomes submerged in and nullified by his intense self-love and is missed to a state of latency. Now, should another person perceive his fault, he is enraged, although he himself is well aware of it. Essentially, his anger is not aroused by the fact that the other person is mistaken in his judgment, suspecting him of a non-existent defect, for indeed he is aware of his shortcoming. Rather, the other person's perceiving of his defect renders it concrete and substantial, whereas when he alone knows of it, his self-love conceals it. In other words, when I accidentally said the wrong thing to my friend and I saw him explode, so what bothered my friend? He doesn't know that it's not so healthy to, if you for your heart, maybe you should lose a couple of pounds and go for a walk. He doesn't know. It's not that he doesn't know. He knows, of course he knows. He struggles with it too, more than the other person knows. When I pointed out, now it's a real thing. It's concrete. Someone else saw it. It's the reality. It says about a personal problem someone's having, so they should tell it to another person. And sometimes that half of solving the problem is just saying it out loud, realizing it's maybe not such a big problem. So by this person, the opposite. That by saying it, you make it feel real to the person, and then in this way, he becomes angry and he becomes defensive. This then is what Hillel is saying. So what is hateful to you? In the same way, the revelation of a personal shortcoming that you yourself are able to forgive, but it's going to feel nice if someone else brings it up. It's going to feel nice if someone, heaven forbid, defines you in that way, that you are this person because you have this shortcoming, as opposed to a superficial, not so significant thing that the person's working on, and we know they're gonna overcome. We know they're gonna make it through. So what is hateful to you, namely the revelation of a shortcoming of someone else, don't do to your fellow. Do not perceive his faults and imperfections, whether in his social conduct or in his spiritual behavior, to consider them concrete and substantial. Instead, let your love for him be so great that it covers his flaw. Do not permit the flaw to move from intellectual awareness to a negative emotional feeling. When a person feels exceedingly great affection and goodwill for another. A love issuing from the very essence of his soul, any wrong the other may inflict upon him will have no significance. It will be nullified in the great intensity of his love. Surging waters cannot extinguish the love. Mayim rabim loy yuchlu v'chulu. Therefore, says Hillel, this is the whole Torah. For the complete unity of the souls of Israel, as if a single entity evokes a most wondrous effect above, which is the essence and purpose of the entire Torah. That is the unity of the Holy One, blessed be He, with His Shekhinah. In other words, by creating and revealing within myself this great love of my fellow Jew, and recognizing this oneness and unity, this is the whole Torah. Hillel is not, in other words, it's not just a fun, nice thing that Hillel is saying. The essence of the whole Torah is you have to be nice to people. Okay, maybe that's true. But that the essence of Torah is actually the unification of God and the Jewish people, of spirituality and physicality, of spirituality and physicality, of Matan Torah, of when God, before Matan Torah, before God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, physicality and spirituality, the heavens and the earth were separated, and there was no blending them, there was no coming together. But the entire purpose of the creation was the opposite, was so that spirituality and physicality could blend. So Hashem Shekhinah is synonymous with Imatata, with the mother above, and Matronita, the source of Jewish souls, that being Malchus being the final midah, the controlling midah of Atzilus in heaven, so to speak, in the perfect world, where God exists unto himself, so to speak, with no evil whatsoever. So it's from this place the Jewish soul comes from. The beauty of Jacob was similar to Adam's. This means that Jacob, who incorporated all the souls, is akin to the beauty of Adam Ha'elyon, the supernal being upon his throne. The appearance of likeness of God's glory for his people is a part of the Lord. In other words, that Jacob was a perfect, complete soul in his love that he had for his fellow man. In the same way, like Adam Arishon, and in this way he was a perfect, complete person. And that's why he's called, or that's why it says that the beauty of Jacob was similar to Adam's. That Jacob also incorporated all the souls. When the souls of Israel join and unite, this in turn unites the one God with the one Israel. That is, God becomes united with Israel, and once this union occurs, the supernal being sees no deficiency within himself, so to speak, metaphorically, and he removes every transgression of Israel as one who cleanses in the mighty ocean. In other words, when a Jewish person sees his fellow Jew as a reflection of the self, and just as I can't see the flaw in myself, I don't see the flaw in my fellow. So this is how Hashem views the Jewish people. When I see the Jewish person as separate from me, so this is how God sees me, separate from him, and I have the flaw. But when I recognize, or rather when I don't recognize the flaw in my fellow, in the same way I wouldn't in myself, so Hashem, so to speak, does not recognize, doesn't mean he doesn't see. God doesn't see. God sees everything. It means he doesn't make significant, he doesn't see as significant the flaw in myself. So the supernal being sees no deficiency within himself, as he removes every transgression from Israel, as one who cleanses in the mighty ocean. As it is written, he beholds no sin in Jacob, but sees no wrongdoing in Israel, for the Lord his God is with him, and man does not see, metaphorically speaking, his own fault. This should suffice for the intelligent. The meaning, then, of the phrase, he beholds no and sees no, is not that they are concealed from him, heaven forbid, for everything is revealed and known to God, even one's trivial conversations and trivial thoughts. Rather, it means, as it is written, he sees no iniquity, or rather, he sees iniquity, but takes no notice of it. So he sees it, but it's not important. The attribute of severity and judgment is not aroused by his infinite and boundless knowledge of their wrongdoings, for his love covers it, as it is written, and God screened for him. God, in this case, Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Hey, is comprised of Kale, Vav, and Hey, which refers to the supernal kindness, which encompasses Kale. Aleph, Lamed represents Chesed, kindness, and Vav and Hey represents godliness as it actually descends and expands into this world. This is not the case, however, when, God forbid, the Jewish people are disunited. Anyone who is within a defect shall not approach to offer, and he causes thereby disunity above. So if I have a sheep with a defect, I'm not allowed to offer this before Hashem. And this means that if I am seeing the flaw, then I'm the one causing the disunity. If I recognize the flaw in my fellow, so it's not actually his flaw that's the issue. It's my noticing it and taking it too seriously. In other words, noticing it, okay. I notice it and I forgive in the same way I forgive, so I don't notice it, right? I notice it and I don't take it so seriously. Okay. The divine blessings are contingent upon the unity of Israel. As we say in the Amidah, in the main blessing, we say 3 times a day, bless us, our Father, all of us as one, with the result that you are wholly beautiful, my beloved, and there is no blemish in you. In other words, that's Hashem responding. This brings about the unity of the Holy One, blessed be He, with the Shekhinah, i.e. the revelation of Or Ein Sof within the source of His soul's Israel to be one with one. Which is another way of saying unifies God and man so that man can actually recognize in his own life God's presence. And this can only occur when Jews are also, and Israel serves as one, which is an individual choice for every single Jewish person to only see and love their fellow Jew in the same way that they love themselves, that they don't see and take seriously the flaws, so to speak, and then God doesn't see and take seriously our flaws. This is the deeper meaning of the verse, you shall be tamim, whole, perfect with the Lord your God. God is in a state of completeness and unity with the totality of the souls of Israel. In other words, it's another way of saying that how are you going to approach the Father? Hey, Dad, I love you. I'm so excited to see you. I can't wait. I'm so glad to be here for Shabbos, but your kids are the worst. In the basic logic, this doesn't work. The whole family has to be together. How are you going to show up and hate some of the other kids? It's not going to work. God doesn't hate those kids. Your Father doesn't hate those kids. So you guys have to learn how to get along. This is the deeper meaning of the verse. You shall be tamim, perfect with Lord your God. God is in a state of completeness and unity with the totality of the souls of Israel. In other words, the radiance of the supernal wisdom shines into the totality of the parts of the Shekhinah, fulfilling, you shall love your fellow as yourself, and does not behold his flaws. So too, you shall be whole and united with your fellows, so that the Lord your God will be your God through the offering of yourself to God, in the recital of the word echad, as has been discussed above. In other words, if that's how Hashem views the Jewish people, that when every Jew comes to say the Shema and is completely forgiven by God, and his flaws aren't taken so seriously, so when you yourself are going to say the Shema, make sure you're also not taking their flaws so seriously. This is why Hillel said all the rest is commentary. For as is known, the whole purpose of mitzvahs is to bring about the unity of the Holy One, blessed be He, with the Shekhinah. This is what we say every day before we say Baruch Shema, right? To bring Yud K and Vav K together. Now the essential unity of the supernal being with the Shekhinah, called the beauty of Yaakov, beauty of Jacob, depends upon the revelation of true love, becoming actual self-love. For as mentioned above, his people are a part of God. Actual self-love, meaning not arrogant love, right? Loving oneself for who one truly is. In this case, a Jew, child of God. This is accomplished through the performance of the mitzvah, you shall love your fellow as yourself. As explained above, all the other mitzvahs are like a commentary that explains the unity. That is, in what form shall this unity take? Whether an intellectual unity, man's wisdom with God's wisdom, through Torah study, or an emotional unity of love or other emotional attributes through the performance of the other mitzvahs. As, for example, if a person forms a strong bond of friendship with another, the cause of the attachment is true love. This close relationship can take various forms, at times in speech, conversing upon intellectual matters, at times in emotion, displaying love for him, and at times indeed in doing him favors. In other words, it's literally the greatest opportunity for a Jew to express his love for God. When he genuinely has an issue with a fellow Jew, but doesn't take it seriously, against all his inclinations, against every good reason, he has a good reason to hate this Jew. He stole money from him, heaven forbid, and this or that, whatever it might be. But his love of God is so great. And this is a real, genuine love of the Father, right? Like, I forgive your other son, and we're going to figure it out for your sake. And this is a real love for the Father. Likewise, the 248 positive mitzvahs correspond to the 248 organs of the king. That the performance of a specific mitzvah brings about the unity intrinsic to the particular organ of which the mitzvah corresponds, and all the other attributes are contained within it. The same is the case for the performance of all the mitzvahs. In other words, there's two ways of looking at a mitzvah. The one way is that it connects me, right? Mitzvah from tetzavet, to bind, to unify, and it connects me to Hashem. The other way to look at it, though, is that Hashem, so to speak, is already there, right? In other words, like, yes, it's unifying me to him, but he doesn't need to be unified to him. Like, he's already healthy. He's already fine. I'm the one lacking in a certain health if I haven't done the mitzvah, so to speak. So once I connect myself, so we said on the one hand, it's like doing Hashem a favor in the sense where, like, I'm doing wonderful by the king. I'm showing my love for Hashem by showing how much I love his children. But on the other hand, I'm simply completing and satisfying the actual connection of myself with God. and the two are one and the same. For example, the mitzvah of wrapping oneself in the talis, whose aim is to accept upon yourself a king, drawing over himself the encompassing light, or makif. So the mitzvah of a talit actually is a physical representation of the idea of accepting yourself a king, which is the idea of drawing this encompassing light onto you, the idea that there's a grander purpose that I succumb to, that I put myself under, so to speak, that I make myself bittul to. This enables the recipient to offer his soul to God in the recital of the word echad. For if there's no fear of God, there is no wisdom. In other words, right, so all proper wisdom of Hashem comes from this level of awe and respect, not fear, fear, but awe and respect. The fear which follows wisdom, as it is written, if there is no wisdom, there is no fear, is complete self-abnegation, which comes because of one's closeness to God. For the characteristic of fear is that as one comes closer, one is more overcome with a feeling of awe, right? So if you had a very important king or whatever that you were coming to meet, like a literal king, I mean, for us it's difficult. If you had a meeting with the President of the United States tomorrow, you not only might get a little nervous, but as you get closer, so to speak, and you meet, heaven forbid, Fauci on your way up there, and Blinken, and whoever you have to meet, but as you get closer and closer up the ranks of the different representatives, you become more and more anxious naturally. The characteristic of love, on the other hand, is one that grows from one further one moves away. And the stronger the love grows. In other words, in the case, again, using the president example, maybe a different president, but if you happen to love this one, and he gives you a mission to do, so in the moment he gives you the mission, of course, there's an immense love and gratitude, but the longer you're away, and the deeper you're out there on the mission, and you're 20 years deep, and you know this president is with you, and you know he still has your back, and he thinks about you, the love only increases. So love is something that actually increases from a distance. So accordingly, after a person has grasped the concept of Hashem's oneness and unity, he will be instilled with an awe of total self-surrender. The idea that God, in his essence, has in every single soul, in every person, in every single tree, in every table, in every chair, in every computer monitor and video recording, that the essence of every single creation ultimately is God himself, and that there's no separating from that, heaven forbid. That this is going to bring upon oneself a fear of a respect and awe, and a majesty, a sense of awe, that allows the person to become invested in the encompassing aspect of the talit, of the mitzvah of the talis itself, inspiring him with a fear that precedes wisdom. And that the fear and that recognition of this great concept is a fear that's actually going to precede wisdom. It's going to allow for greater wisdoms to enter into your conscious faculties, because you're connecting to a grander concept that is, it's being expressed through fear, and it's literally greater than any understanding that a person can have so far, because it's of the highest understanding. The fear, the simple fear and understanding of Hashem himself leads to the greatest wisdoms. And this is only an explanation of the unity generated by the soul's faculty of wisdom, even when one offers his soul to God through the recital of the word echad in the Shema. This is the deeper meaning of unity, which essentially derives from the positive mitzvah of love your fellow. For then you are altogether beautiful, my beloved, and you shall be perfect with the Lord your God, as explained above. In other words, that every single Jewish person, and to recognize that in that person as well, that their life experience, as a soul, a sub-soul of Adam, who was sent into this world, and has that same ability to have that awe and fear of God, but is also sent far away, so that that love that they have for Hashem, and that all these inyanim, all these ideas that are affecting you are also affecting that person, and that my way of completing my mission and unifying myself and that self with God himself is by loving that person in the same way that I love myself. That if I'm able to recognize that, so Hashem says, you are all beautiful, my beloved, and you shall be perfect with the Lord your God, as explained above. So this, the mitzvah of you shall love, and especially the negative precept, you shall not hate, can be explained from another perspective. That is, in light of the exposition elsewhere on the verse, choose from among you to bring the Lord retribution upon Midian. There it explains that the klipa of Midian is baseless hatred, and the retribution of God must be executed upon Midian. See there. So in a different discourse, the Rebbe explains how this same idea goes to rationalize and justify you why we come to destroy the nation known as Midian, which represents baseless hatred, sinus chinam, because in this world, where my same self-love, obviously seeing the same self-hatred is not even, seeing skinning from oneself is not even a reasonable concept to let's say, a healthy person, right? If a person is struggling with, they hate themselves so much that it's mamish, it's literally their norm, so then God should bless them, of course, to find health immediately and find happiness immediately. That's not a normal experience for people, right? The ability to love oneself, even for a person with immense struggles in life, is a naturally inclined thing, even if not in the most literal, like, oh, I love myself, like people who take selfies all day, but where I'm able to forgive myself for and understand myself and be kind to myself, even when I don't necessarily recognize it. So it's through this and through that ability of loving myself, if I can, from that same place that I so obviously forgive myself, if I can treat every single Jew that exact same way, any person who has ever truly wronged me, heaven forbid, especially when literally coming to say the Shema, so I will create a unity with God and the Jewish people that is satisfying the very purpose of creation, and otherwise could not have been achieved without your soul coming into a body, you have experiencing that pain and suffering, and still through that deciding to make the choice to love that fellow Jew as yourself, and thereby creating that unity with Hashem himself, and hopefully taking us one step closer to Mashiach Mamish. L'chaim.